Hello all, James here, and I know what you're saying. What, you're releasing a video at like midnight on a Saturday night? Do you have no life? Well, apparently not, because I'm making this video and I've got big news in the wrestling world, and that news is that CM Punk is gone from AEW, or to use the phrase in the press release, Phil Brooks' contract has been terminated with cause. And in fact, here is the full press release. Just bear with me one second, I'll get it up. So, statement from All In Wrestling and Tony Khan. All Elite Wrestling AEW has terminated the wrestler and employment agreements between Phil Brooks, CM Punk, and AEW with cause effective immediately. The termination was confirmed today by Tony Khan, CEO, General Manager, and Head of Creative of AEW. The termination follows a week-long internal investigation of an incident occurring backstage at AEW All in London on Sunday, August 27th. Following the investigation, the AEW Discipline Committee met. The AEW Discipline Committee, I wonder who's in that one. Met and later convened with outside legal counsel before making a unanimous recommendation to Khan that CM Punk be terminated with cause. Khan offered the following statement. Phil played an important role within AEW and I thank him for his contributions. The termination of his AEW contract with cause is ultimately my decision and mine alone. Of course, I wish I didn't have to share this news, which may come as a disappointment to many of our fans. Nevertheless, I am making the decision in the best interests of the many amazing people who make AEW possible every week. Our talent, staff, venue, operators, and many others whose efforts are unsung but essential to bringing our fans great shows on television and at arenas and stadiums throughout the world. So, sorry, you can see my OBS thing there. Right, so I'm going to be looking quite at the screen here because I've written quite a lot, so I'm going to try and bring you up to speed in case, for whatever reason, you don't know what has led all up to this. So, if you have been living under a rock for maybe, I don't know, the last 18 months and you're a wrestling fan or lapsed wrestling fan, you'll probably know what the score is, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. So, if you're on the EVP side of things or you're on Punk's side of things, it's probably easy to say that CM Punk has been the main cause of friction in the AEW locker room for the past 18 months or so. And if you don't think he's the main cause of the friction, he's at least involved in the big friction, or most of the big friction in the AEW locker room for so long. Now, nearly a year ago, previous issues between CM Punk, Kenny Omega, Adam Hangman Page and the Young Bucks culminated in a post-pay-per-view tirade from Punk, with Tony Khan doing his wide-eyed nodding dog routine next to him, as Punk publicly buried Kenny, the Bucks, Hangman Adam Page, the company, and basically everything and so forth before eating a muffin and saying how nice a guy he was. Now, Punk had already had issues with Page publicly after Page went off script during an in-ring face-off, prompting Punk a couple of episodes later calling out Page, which also wasn't in the script, and then sort of making Page look like a bit of a chump when he didn't answer the challenge, and then Punk just basically mocked him and then carried on with his promo. We don't know if Hangman was in, I think he was in catering, probably not taking anybody's advice. Then the backstage fight happened after the post-pay-per-view scrum. The Young Bucks super kicked the door down. Rumours of it taking about 32 kicks before the door took the fall are unsubstantiated. Now, loud noises were heard, a dog ran around, and Ace Steel bit Kenny Omega and some various stuff. I think there was a chair in there as well. Steel was fired. Everybody else was suspended. Now, not that the suspension mattered much to Punk, because in that pay-per-view he'd also injured his triceps, which saw him sit on the shelf for about 9 months, while every wrestling fan past and present debated whether he would ever return to AEW, while Tony Khan and AEW sat around and refused to say absolutely anything about the backstage incident, which overshadowed pretty much everything that the AEW promotion and all the TV was actually showing on screen. And I don't know if anyone else noticed this, just after Punk was suspended and everyone was suspended, it sort of coincided with like a downturn in viewership for AEW for Dynamite. That's how I remember it anyway. I'm hoping I'm right there. And people listening now will complain like, well, they are under a legal gag order not to talk about it. But guess what? Tony Khan can actually at least talk about how it made him feel, or just something, or just dance around the subject. But he sort of all culminated in a really awkward scene that played out on an Ariel Helwani interview, which ended up just being really, really awkward when he just refused to acknowledge it at all. And then, speaking of never acknowledging it, on TV, obviously CM Punk was injured, so at least that was a storyline explanation. But, you know, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks were never on TV because they were suspended, and it was never explained. Especially, it was never explained why the trios titles were stripped off them either. They just simply were, and then the company moved on. Now, Omega and the Young Bucks returned after I can't remember how, I don't know, a couple of months maybe, and then eventually CM Punk returned. Now, Warner Brothers Discovery seemed to make it clear that the fate of AEW Collision, the AEW's third show, would only be greenlit if Punk were to be its flag bearer. And as we all know now, I'm sure most of you know now, how the vast majority of income that big wrestling shows like WWE and AEW out there, they rely basically on just content production far more than actually selling tickets these days. So getting a third show was a big deal with a load of guaranteed money coming with it. So it was very much worth Tony Khan's while to bring Punk back. And then it was announced that Punk was coming back, and then the day that all the press release material came out, Punk wasn't on any of it because he'd had a fallout with AEW or whoever he had a fallout, and I seem to remember it was something to do with Ace Steel either returning in person or working remotely, I think, in an agent's role. And then they worked it out in the last minute, and then CM Punk makes a triumphant return to star in the main event along with his buddies FTR. Now, of course, because all these grown men in their late 30s and mid-40s can't get along, Punk would make sure that he and his buddies Ron Collision and Kenny Omega and Adam Page and the Young Bucks and their associates were on Dynamite and Rampage, and then there was quite a lot of the roster that would just appear on any show, essentially, because they, I don't know, one was NWO Black and White and one was NWO Wolfpack, and then the non-affiliated types just went wherever they wanted, I suppose. And where am I? Although I should make mention that Punk did also turn up to a Dynamite that didn't feature any of the EVPs actually on the show. Now, anyway, the system seemed to work, this sort of segregation for this apartheid almost of AEW, at least for a few weeks anyway. Then various dramas started leaking out, and all featuring Punk in some way, it seemed. Now, keep in mind that I'm not saying Pink Floyd. Punk is actually wrong in all these instances, but some were clearly issues that didn't need to be exacerbated by mentioning them publicly. So, I actually talked with Dutch Mantel about this a couple of weeks ago. So, a few weeks previously, Collision stopped rolling its cameras, they stopped filming, and then CM Punk was doing the post-show promo to the fans, thanking them for coming, and then he sees a sign in the crowd that makes him angry, and then for just random reasons I think it was a sign involving Adam Page, but then he starts shooting on Adam Page, and here's the quote: "Today I went to a local supermarket and I figured out why they call him Hangman. It's because the pegs in the toy aisle are full of Hangman action figures because nobody wants to buy him. He's a peg warmer unlike me who moves merchandise and pops ratings and sells toys. And everybody in AEW saying I'm the heart, I'm the soul, I'm the spirit, well, that's subjective. What is fact is the people who say that certainly aren't the chin of AEW because the lights go out faster than..." And then sort of just starts trailing off and then starts complaining about House of Black chopping him when he said in the back, "No chops." CM Punk later sent Page a text message apologising for the promo, and basically the explanation was that he was attempting some sort of comedy routine that he just saw was really going off the rails and then sort of just stopped. And then there were also rumours that Punk got Hangman Page removed from the AEW Collision taping either that week or maybe the week before, but I think it was that week. Although there's many conflicting reports ranging from it was a management call and Punk had nothing to do with it, to Hangman was never going to be at the Collision show in the first place, or that he was going to shoot like a backstage vignette or away from the arena that was going to be inserted into the show. Having said that, it's believed CM Punk did get Ryan Nemeth, the brother of Dolph Ziggler, removed from the Collision taping because, according to PW Insider, he refused to say hello to Punk and his posse. And some can look at that and say, well, he's deliberately provoking Punk because, as you know, everyone shakes everybody's hand, etc., etc., etc. And then, another suggested rumour out there was that Matt Hardy was removed from an AEW Collision booking because of Punk, but I don't think there's that much information on that. But here's one that I think was confirmed, was that Christopher Daniels, who isn't really an on-screen character anymore, but is the head of talent relations, was basically banned from Collision. And the explanation given at the time was that if Ace Steel can't return, then Christopher Daniels can't be there, because essentially he's too close to the elite, the Young Bucks and CM Punk, Kenny Omega. CM Punk's not elite. Now, Daniels is an executive, and Punk clearly has clearly had outrageous power within AEW because Warner Brothers Media demanded Punk return if AEW wanted Collision to go ahead. Now, the big issue really here is that Punk's outright firing from the company involved Punk and Jungle Boy Jack Perry, which frustratingly for Punk and others, Punk was basically in the right for the initial confrontation and, looking out for Jack Perry's welfare, essentially. Now, Fightful reported a few weeks ago, but this apparently happened in late June, early July, around the Canadian Collision tapings, was that Perry was brought into one of 4 Collision episodes, and he wanted to film a segment that contained a spot which Perry wanted to use real glass for in order to write him off TV for a week or two to explain his absence because he was going to take a holiday that was already pre-booked. Now, according to the report, Punk felt Perry was throwing a temper tantrum over his desired use of real glass, despite production doctors and Tony Schiavone recommending otherwise. Now, Punk reportedly felt Perry was trying to avoid having to work the next week, which he sees as a big problem in the company. But as I say, apparently this was to do with the booking of a holiday. But also, apparently, it was important for Perry to use real glass and not Hollywood stunt or sugar glass because he wanted to take an unnecessary risk. Now, I think most people will see that from CM Punk's side as far as saying to a younger person, why would you just put your body in unnecessary harm? Although some people could also say that, hey, that's not Punk's job, it should be the agent's job or Tony Khan's job. Now, here's the big one. CM Punk versus Jungle Boy backstage fight at All in Wembley. Now, this was the All in Wembley show that I was actually at, and I was actually reading the news of this, I think about an hour after it happened on whatever website I was looking at. So it was all happening in the back, it was all happening at the ring at the same time. It was very entertaining, quite frankly. Now, Punk and Jungle Boy Jack Perry really got into it at Gorilla Position, or whatever they're calling Gorilla Position in AEW. They may have a different name for it, but anyway. Many different versions of this story have surfaced, but essentially Jungle Boy Jack Perry at All In did some bumps onto a limo. There's only one version of that, if you know what I mean. I mean, I saw it. And then he was fighting Hook. I think he was defending the FTR title, and he looks into the camera, he being Jack Perry. It's real glass, Crimea River. And then Punk is the next match. He was actually opening the show because Jack Perry and Hook were the last of the pre-show matches. And then the opening match of the actual pay-per-view at All In was CM Punk versus Samoa Joe for the quote-unquote real World's Championship kind of thing. Punk meets Jack Perry, there is some sort of confrontation, and the two get into a scuffle at Gorilla Position. Then Samoa Joe is then very unhappy about it because he has to break up the fight, which explains why Joe had blood on him before the match started, which I only realised a couple of days ago. Now, according to Brian Alvarez and Wrestling Observer, here's what went down. Perry said something to the effect of, well, you heard what I said out there, according to several people. Punk said something to the effect of, you know I can beat your ass, right? There was a quick incident, and nearly 100% of people Alvarez spoke with say Punk made the comment and either shoved or pie-faced Perry and then put him in a guillotine headlock. Now, there are various different versions of what happened. That's essentially marries up with what everyone has said. It was immediately broken up soon after. They got close enough to Tony Khan, who was in Gorilla Position, that monitors were apparently knocked down onto Khan. Alvarez said that unlike the brawl following All Out, there were a lot of witnesses to this all happening, including Khan himself. Alvarez said that Punk was furious about the situation, and several people said he threatened to quit and didn't want to go out for his match against Samoa Joe, which caused a delay. Alvarez says he heard the results that resulted in AEW personnel going to FTR and the Young Bucks about opening the show, but they weren't ready to go on. AEW went to the participants in the Golden Elite versus Bullet Club Gold trios bout, and they said that they could do it if needed. So Punk essentially throwing... okay, right, so I hadn't actually written this part in my script, but I'll say this now, is, okay, fine, Jungle Boy Jack Perry is provoking a response 2 different times for Punk, but surely it's just a few words here and there and Punk getting physical quite quickly. I don't know, it depends what you think about it, but really, if Punk is supposed to be the leader of the locker room, really should he be doing all this fighting, or should he just go complain to Tony Khan and then let him deal with it, and then Jungle Boy gets suspended or gets talking to, or whatever he does? I don't know. Now, it was also reported and disputed that Punk and Miro may or may not have had a backstage confrontation as well. So I'll just leave that one there because we just don't know. Some people say they had words. Other people said they had words, but in a completely joking manner. But also but also Miro keeps taking digs at Punk on Twitter. So who knows? But we'll leave that one there. Now, both, CM Punk and Tony Khan also had heat because apparently Punk didn't get a ride pre-booked and arranged for him from the airport to Wembley Stadium. Now, apparently nobody actually had their travel arranged for them from the airport to the arena, supposedly. But varying reports say how upset Punk was and how lost he got because I think he had to take a train or the tube or whatever he had to do. Tube. And that's just another thing where he was upset with Khan, supposedly, so it was reported. You know how that goes as well. Now, both Jungle Boy, Jack Perry, and CM Punk were suspended pretty much immediately pending an investigation. I should also say that Perry was escorted out of the arena very, very quickly. And then Punk, according to some people, according to others, he either voluntarily was escorted from the stadium but may have been allowed to stay there, or he was forcibly removed. We don't know this at that point. As I say, so many people claim to have the inside track and so many people give differing stories, but they're basically the two. And now today, it has been announced that CM Punk, Phil Brooks, has been fired. Now, it's a shame that this has happened at this time because AEW have a pay-per-view coming up in less than 24 hours as I record this in Chicago, where their biggest draw, CM Punk, in that part of the country, will now certainly not be appearing on the show. That was already AEW's, this is All Out and not All In. I always blow the two names because they're so similar and they're a week apart. That was already AEW's weakest card on paper in quite some time. So, will this affect the buy rates now that we know that it's also a weak card and that we know that Punk isn't going to be there or wrestle? I'd say probably, and this is especially considering that All In Wembley, that pay-per-view seems to have done quite well and was also 6 days ago as I record this. And it'll just be 6.5 days pretty much by the time it goes out. And I will be very, very interested to know what the difference is of buy rates between tomorrow's pay-per-view and last week's pay-per-view, especially with CM Punk not being there. So what is next for CM Punk? We all like a prediction, and I'm going to go for a long shot here. But for whatever reason, my hunch is that Punk will probably find his way back to WWE. Now, I know that Punk has had lawsuits but the thing is that it just, bad feelings never ever quite seem to last forever. And I'll explain why in a second, why I think that. But as difficult as CM Punk is, WWE has far stronger leadership than AEW and Tony Khan. Although saying that, Tony Khan has just fired CM Punk, which is probably his first real big boy move, tough decision he's really made since he founded AEW, quite frankly, as far as I can tell. And WWE, anyway, as I say, has much stronger leadership. They have far more structured office staff and agents and all that kind of thing. And it will be more easy to keep him in line, I think, because it's just a more structured environment. Punk doesn't need the money, quite clearly, apparently, and he clearly enjoys having a significant amount of creative freedom, but he also may want to build on his wrestling legacy, maybe by finishing his career in WWE, because, he's always wanted to main event a WrestleMania, and also he has worked really, really hard to get back into ring shape after 9 months on the shelf. So I can't imagine he wanted to work, all that time to rehab his arm just to wrestle for about 2 months, if that, probably about 2 months, and then just go back on the sidelines. I doubt that. So, excuse me, call that a wide, it might be wide of the mark completely, but my throat's really dry because I've been talking so much and I've got no water in this damn room. But anyway, the important thing is that he doesn't attempt another, a UFC comeback, because my sides remain split from laughing so hard the last time he fought. Anyway, what will happen to AEW Collision and, in fact, actually the show itself, because, no contract's ever ironclad. You never know if there's some inbuilt rating that, if AEW doesn't meet a certain amount of ratings, they can't just, Warner Brothers Discovery can't just cancel it. I don't know. But anyway, what will happen with AEW Collision is creative direction specifically, because obviously CM Punk was the leader, and he was keeping certain people off the show, and I suspect he was creatively, handling things to a certain extent with having certain things he wanted on there and keeping certain things or people he didn't want on the show. And it also seems that, old school fans appreciate Collision's booking and presentation more than Dynamite's presentation, even though that Dynamite is still the A show in AEW land. And also, which will be interesting to see, like the pay-per-view buy rates, will the ratings hold up or will they fall with the disappearance of CM Punk? Now, who knows? But it's sure going to be fun finding out. So if there's any information I left out or forgot, then don't worry about it. It probably wasn't very important in the first place. And remember, it's only wrestling. Don't take things too seriously. So I'll see you next time. Bye.